why am I so bloated? Because honestly, I do feel like almost everyone I know has asked this question.
Often food can affect bloating, but is that the underlying cause? Maybe not. So it could be that someone has developed a different condition. It could be an autoimmune condition. It could be celiac disease as a type of that. There's also inflammatory bowel conditions. So number one is we kind of need to know what the underlying cause of that is.
Welcome to Patient in the Room, the podcast where we talk about those things that you Google in the middle of the night and debunk some of the myths that we might see online. Today's guest is Lucy Kerrison, a dietitian who specialises in gut health and works with everything from bloating and IBS to celiac disease and those unexplained stomach symptoms many people may deal with. Lucy, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
So, let's start with a question so many people ask. Why am I so bloated? Because honestly, I do feel like almost everyone I know has asked this question.
Yes, good starting point. So bloating is one of the most common things I see in clinic. And I would say maybe kind of 80% of my patients will have it. And I think the first thing to think about is this bloating normal? Or is this bloating really impacting my life? Is it painful? Am I seeing lots of distension and I'm getting huge swelling? Do I need to change my trousers in the evening? So how much bloating is there? Because if I've had quite a big meal and I'm feeling uncomfortable and I'm feeling a bit gassy, then that's very normal. And when we want to intervene or when we want to treat is when that bloating is, particularly large, particularly uncomfortable or painful, or if it's a very big change. So perhaps you're someone who's never really had bloating before and suddenly you're getting lots of bloating. Or perhaps you've had a change in bowel symptoms alongside. So what we're looking for is kind of a big change in what's usual for you, and also how kind of like extensive or painful is that bloating, and that's when we want to intervene.
And I feel like so often when people are talking about, being severely bloated, it's always something that they've done wrong. So they've drank too much coffee, they've eaten too much bread, various things like this. Is it always something that we would have eaten, or can it sometimes be something a bit more complex than that? Yeah,
really good question. And I think it is more complex. Bloating, there's a number of things that affect it. And so if this is bloating which is kind of new or very intense or something that's different for you, and we do get it investigated, we need to know what's causing it, because often food can affect bloating, but is that the underlying cause? Maybe not. So it could be that someone has developed a different condition. It could be an autoimmune condition. It could be celiac disease as a type of that. There's also inflammatory bowel conditions. So number one is we kind of need to know what the underlying cause of that is. If it's something where it's a food sensitivity, it could be, depending on volume, it could be depending on types of foods, but it could also be that, maybe you've had a day where you've been a bit less active, maybe you've gone on holiday and you're really constipated because you're having less fibre than usual, and then you're bloated. So we kind of need to look at the whole gut function as well as just the bloating. And we need to know kind of what's underlying and what's causing it, which is where a dietitian, a gastro and a GP can help you.
And in terms of kind of like what is normal in terms of bowel habits, amount of bloating after food, that kind of thing?
Yeah, a really good question. So in terms of bowel habits, anything from about 3 times a day, so up to 3 times a day, and down to every third day is considered normal. But I think more important than that is what's normal for you, because if you're someone who's used to opening your bowels every day and then suddenly you get a change and actually now you're opening your bowels 3 times a day, or now you're only going twice a week, that's quite a big change for you. So we need to look at what's normal for you. So that's kind of like frequency of stools. And then the other thing to think about is how kind of easy they are to pass. So if you're, maybe normal for you is going every day, but actually the stools are really small and hard and difficult to pass, actually that's not normal and we want to treat it. So we need to look at kind of the size of the stool, how easy it is to pass, if there's anything like blood or mucus or anything slightly less usual, and if it's a big change for you.
And what would a normal colour of stool be?
Yeah, so it can really vary, and it can be kind of lots of different types of brown. So as long as it's a good shade of brown, then I'm happy with it. If it's becoming particularly pale or like white or very unusual, and again, if it's a huge change for you, so if it's varying between degrees of brown, absolutely fine, no problem. You might even find, if you're taking iron supplements, you might see a black stool, but if you've got a black stool and actually there's no reason for it, then you definitely need that investigated. So any kind of shade of brown is pretty normal.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I guess so if someone was having bowel movements twice a week and that's normal for them, that is considered okay.
Absolutely. And I think this becomes really difficult because people are talking about their bowel habits a little bit more now, which is fantastic.
Yep.
But I think we also need to think about kind of how we're talking about them, because everyone is slightly different. So what's normal for one person might not be normal for another person. And then the other thing to think about is on, media, social media, I think there can be a lot of fear around bowel movements. So I love that we're all talking about it more, but there is, there can be, if you have a small change, if it's a different shade, if it's a light brown, actually that's not really an issue for most people. So I think we want to get that right balance between what's normal for me, what's a really big change, and what's normal along the kind of the medical scales.
Yeah. I feel like what I see often online is, these reels, carousels from lots of influencers around the perfect gut routine. And these can kind of range from, eating yogurt daily to these very encompassing kind of exercises and restrictive diets.
Yeah.
Do you kind of have some practical perfect gut routines, tips for people? Around that?
Yeah. So I think there's no perfect gut routine. So I definitely wouldn't be saying we need to be like up at 5 a.m, meditating, having your, morning psyllium husk. So a perfect routine is really, it's something that works for you. So we do want regular bowel habits. We do want a good amount of fibre. And I want to talk about fibre a lot because that's really important. And so really, as long as you're feeling good, as long as you're having regular bowel movements, you're not having lots of pain, lots of cramping, lots of bloating, I think what we want to do is feed our gut for good stuff. So instead of restricting in terms of diets, unless you've been medically advised, we want to be looking at what we can add in to support our gut, because all the evidence is showing that actually, in terms of gut, in terms of microbiome, we need to be adding in more foods. So really, I guess my top tip in terms of like a good gut routine is making sure you're nice and regular in terms of stools. Stools are easy to pass, and you're having a really nice level of fibre. So slowly building up fibre, lots of colours in your diet, high omega-3 products. So if you eat fish, then fish is a great one. If not, then there's things like chia seeds, flax seeds, etc. So it's about getting the right stuff in. And I think also not over worrying about your gut routine, because again, if you're getting kind of like overly focused on your gut, then that itself can cause symptoms. Or if you are, kind of thinking about this a lot and getting really stressed out with it, then again, that can make your gut function a little bit less well. So I think we want to take a really nice relaxed approach, unless we're specifically looking to treat your gut because there's problems with it.
And so you mentioned eating the right amount of fibre throughout our diet. What kind of foods can we find good source of fibre in?
So there's lots of foods, and for anyone who is not experiencing like lots of gut issues, then we want to work towards slowly building up the fibres in your diet. So your fibres are in all of your different plant-based products. So I think often when we talk about plants, we think about vegetables, we think about fruits, which are great, but actually you could have, fruits and vegetables every day and still have quite a low fibre diet. So we also want to look at things like beans and pulses. So these are really nice prebiotics, so they feed your good gut bacteria. So things like chickpeas, butter beans, lentils. We want to think about nuts and seeds. We want to think about your whole grains, which could be, for example, a dark sourdough, it could be whole grain pasta, it could be grains like quinoa, buckwheat, farro, that kind of thing. So we want to get a nice kind of range of different fibre types. And what I always like to do is make sure you're including fibre in every single meal. So, for example, it could be, porridge at breakfast with some seeds and some berries. Maybe at lunchtime you're then having, say, like a high fibre grain alongside your protein, alongside your veggies.
And so if we're eating the right diet, but we're still feeling like something isn't right, so maybe we've got pain, we might have blood in our stool, we might be super bloated, you would kind of recommend going to see your GP, your dietitian, to kind of see what the underlying cause might be.
Absolutely. So first port of call is usually GP, and they can do some simple screening tests. They might do some blood tests. They might do some stool tests as well, just depending on what your symptoms are. And so these are to rule out different inflammatory conditions, things like celiac disease, blood in your stool, so other, underlying issues in terms of stool or cancers. And so that screening is really important. So you can do that with a GP. You can do that also with a gastro specialist dietitian. And I would say from the nutrition side, really important to choose a dietitian over a nutritionist, because we're trained with the medical side. And then you can also look at a gastroenterologist as well. So they would do those screening tests and they can do more extensive tests. So a GP, a gastro-dietitian can do your simple screening tests, and then they'd refer to a gastro for more extensive testing.
And so when something is wrong, so I just wanted to touch on IBS here. So, it's something that is talked about a lot. I think it's also, a diagnosis that is a lot of people do have. So could you just tell us a little bit more around IBS, what it is, what those symptoms might be as well?
Yes, absolutely. So I see a lot of this in my clinic. It's probably one of the biggest things I see. And I actually like to talk more broadly about disorders of gut-brain interaction. So IBS, the term has been around for years. I think it was the 1940s it came out.
Oh, wow.
Super old, yeah. And it's irritable bowel syndrome. And so there's some very specific symptoms that kind of fit under that category, but more broadly it comes under the disorders of gut-brain interaction, which were previously known as functional disorders. And I think disorders of gut-brain interaction kind of describe the condition better, and we can then teach you how to treat it better, because what we're looking at with IBS or disorders of gut-brain interaction is we know there's a lot of changes in your gut. So previously it was thought that it was a functional condition, meaning there's no underlying medical cause, but actually there's underlying pathology. And so we know there's a miscommunication between the gut and the brain. Importantly, this doesn't mean it's driven by stress. And it could be that, for example, about a third of cases are post-infectious. So someone could go and have a lovely holiday in Thailand, become really unwell, get vomiting or diarrhea, and then their whole gut function changes. And we think that's because it's a change in the microbiome, which has then impacted the whole way the gut is functioning. So with disorders of gut-brain interaction, there's a change. It could be a change in the gut, could be a change in the brain, so a very traumatic event, a very stressful event. And then wherever that starts, if it starts in the gut, if it starts in the brain, we know those two are very closely linked via the nervous system, via the vagus nerve. And so both interact with each other. And so when we're treating these conditions, we need to think about the gut, the microbiome, any sensitivities in terms of foods, but also the brain and how we can calm the nervous system. And so we know in all of these cases, there can be an exaggerated response to, say, foods, certain foods, to hormones, to environment. So someone who has a disorder of gut-brain interaction, they might be more sensitive to, say, a bit of emotional stress than someone who doesn't have that disorder. So although it's not necessarily driven by stress for a lot of people, they can be more reactive to that. So it's quite a complicated condition, but I think that disorder of gut-brain interaction describes it really nicely. And for every person, there can be different symptoms. So some people will have bloating and constipation. Some people will have, really loose stools or diarrhea and lots of pain. Some people will have cramping. So it really, really varies the types of symptoms that you have. And those different symptoms all need to be treated slightly differently in terms of diet.
I didn't realise how closely the brain and the bowel were linked, and that actually, having gut issues doesn't necessarily mean there is something inherently wrong medically with your bowel, or your gut. It could actually be an emotional kind of trauma that you've had to a certain food or something like that.
Absolutely. So again, a lot of the cases that you see in clinic, it might be that there's a big underlying trauma or something really, really stressful happens, and then that changes the way that your body perceives pain. And so there's all these nerves that go to your gut. And so when you're eating foods, those nerves are activated, and it might be that, certain foods that cause a bit more gas production will then cause that increase in pain. So your body is sensing pain in an exaggerated way. So that can be kind of one way. Other ways is, post-antibiotics, post-infectiously, that's when the gut bacteria change, and then it can feed back up through the brain. So it might be that nothing stressful has happened at all, but there's been a change in the gut microbiome. So it's a really interesting condition, and everyone kind of needs a slightly different holistic treatment.
And is our gut microbiome constantly changing, or do we have a standard individual gut biome?
Really good question. So everyone's is quite individual, and we're still kind of working on what we think a really healthy gut bacteria looks like. But we know diversity is key, and we know there's some species that are more probiotic and we want more of. We know there's some species that can be more opportunistic and potentially cause issues. And so you're building your microbiome very predominantly in your early years, but it is changeable, which I think is a great thing, because you're building it very early up to kind of 3-4 years old, and then it changes a little bit across the life cycle. So for women, it changes a lot when you start your periods. It changes again when you go through the perimenopause, but it can also change based on food. So we know that diet can really rapidly and reproducibly change your microbiome. And I think this is a really good thing because you might have a change in your microbiome through medication or through something else or through stress. And then we know actually if you're feeding your gut for right things, we can really improve your microbiome. However, if you've got gut sensitivities, we kind of need to work those out first. So any client I see who has disordered gut-brain interaction, we go through a bit of a process where we're looking to improve symptoms and then we're always looking to long-term work on the microbiome. And so it might be that there's a few foods you're sensitive to. So then we're kind of selectively diversifying fibres and different foods versus just diversifying completely, which is what we would do for someone without gut symptoms. But if you do that for someone who's experiencing bloating or pain, you might increase that bloating and pain. So we want to be a bit more selective.
And when you say food sensitivities within kind of like your gut, what's actually happening within your gut when you're kind of eating those foods?
Yes, so it varies a lot depending on the foods. And so in terms of sensitivities and intolerances, it's really complicated in terms of what causes them. So we know one contributor is that we call it increased visceral hypersensitivity, so increased nerve sensitivity to the gut. And we know there's certain foods that reach certain parts of the gut. So for example, your very simple sugars, they're all absorbed very high up in your gut. We've got fibres which go all the way through your gut because they're not digested. And then there's certain types of fibres that can cause more sensitivity than others. So there's certain types of fibres that are broken down by bacteria, which produce gas as a byproduct. There's certain fibres that work by drawing water into the gut. And this can all impact your gut function. So if you're someone who's had, say, like a change in the microbiome and you're suddenly getting loads of loose stools, we might reduce some of those specific fibres that draw water into the gut, for example.
And when we talk about the digestive system and the gut, where actually are we talking about?
Yeah, so the digestive system, it goes right from your mouth all the way to the bottom. It's about 9 meters long, so super long. And because it's so long, I know.
That's
how
crazy.
Does that fit inside you? So because it's so long, it's quite squashed up. And so we also see changes between males and females. So females are actually a bit longer and we've got smaller bodies, so it's even a bit more squished up. So we can be more prone to things like constipation. But what we're talking about is kind of through the mouth, we have your esophagus and then it reaches your stomach. And then it goes into a small intestine, which is where it starts to fold. And then it goes into a large intestine and right down to the bottom. So it's kind of all the way up.
Yeah. Wow, that's okay. I didn't realise it was like 9 meters can sit inside of us. That's
I know.
Absolutely insane. I'd love to kind of talk around diet culture as well. Because I feel like that's really, really changed throughout the years. And specifically, I'd like to talk around FODMAP diet. But
The low FODMAP diet is looking at reducing a bunch of kind of short-chain sugars, which we know are fermented in the lower gut. And so it's a range of different carbohydrates, and it includes things like onion, garlic, pulses. It includes wheat-based products. It includes certain fruits and vegetables as well. And so these are all really good, healthy products. And often in cases of, bloating, etc., people will cut them out to feel better. There's a couple of things to think about. So with the low FODMAP diet, it shouldn't really be a long-term diet. It's more of a low FODMAP process. And so you should really just do this with a dietitian. So you'd be cutting out for about 4 weeks some or all of these high FODMAP foods. I often do some, not all, because the full diet is really restrictive. And then if you're feeling better in terms of symptoms, you would start to test or reintroduce these foods. And then longer term, you'd bring back in the ones that you tolerate. The ones that you don't tolerate, you can either keep them out or you can try to build up your tolerance. And sometimes it's used when we go back to diet culture. Because for low FODMAP diet, you're cutting out a lot of foods. Often people lose weight on it, but that's not intentional. And for a lot of people, if I see them in clinic, people who have gut symptoms tend to be at higher risk of weight loss anyway, because it's harder to eat as much. So some people do follow this diet as a way of losing weight, which is absolutely not what we should be doing, because what we know is the low FODMAP diet is full of prebiotics, so they feed your good bacteria. So you're actually cutting out lots of really healthy foods. So you might be losing weight in a very unhealthy way if you're following a low FODMAP diet for weight loss. The other thing I see a lot is people who are on a low FODMAP diet and then they stay on a low FODMAP diet because they feel better. And that's absolutely not what you should do, because we know that all really good, again, healthy foods, they feed your gut microbiome. So long term, that's not good for you. And all the studies show that it makes your gut bacteria less diverse. It pulls away things like bifidobacteria, which are really important for us.
What is bifidobacteria?
So that's one type of probiotic in the gut. So there's a few probiotics that are very well studied. So different strains of bifidobacteria, lactobacillus, akkermansia. And so we know that in particular bifidobacteria, if you stay on a low FODMAP diet, then that reduces in the gut. and we don't want that.
And how long would you recommend that someone stay on a low FODMAP diet? Or is it kind of individual to everyone?
It's pretty individual, but as a rough guide, kind of 4 to 8 weeks. Like 8 is a bit too long. And what I would do in clinic as well is I would do this based on symptoms, because some people come to me and they'll say, Lucy, I'm really bloated and I'm really constipated. I want to try a low FODMAP diet. And I actually would say that will make it worse, because all your FODMAPs, most of them are high fibre foods. So if you take them out, it's going to make you more constipated. And sometimes constipation can be the reason you're bloated, because everything's moving through so slowly. So the symptoms for low FODMAP diet helps the most are loose stools, lower down bloating, and kind of like gas, and gas and flatulence. So if someone has all of those sets of symptoms, then we might do the full low FODMAP diet, but often I would just do a variation of it, which is a little bit less strict. So kind of 4 to 8 weeks for restriction, and then kind of 6 to 8 weeks for retesting foods, and then we'd get like a longer term plan.
And for those that are actually looking to lose weight, do you have any kind of like healthy diets that people could go on that you would recommend?
So my top one that comes to mind is Mediterranean style diet, because that's a diet that we know really feeds our microbiome. And so what you want to think about of weight loss is you want to think about getting in enough protein to help you retain muscle mass. So we know if you change the macronutrient composition of your diet, you're going to change your body composition. So you could have the same calories, but more protein, you're going to have better muscle mass. So when you're losing weight, you want to be exercising, you want to be going higher protein. But also, as a gut health dietitian, you need to look at your fibre, because if you've got a very high protein, low fibre diet, not good for your gut. And also if you have a, high protein, high fibre diet, not as good for your gut. So you kind of want moderate to high protein. Like, it's all about the protein fibre ratio. So if you're looking to lose weight in a healthy way, you do want to keep in a good amount of protein, and then you want to be also keeping in a good amount of fibre. And the other thing the fibre does is, because we know that your microbiome and your gut health is so important for things like blood sugar control, metabolism, etc., then keeping in a high fibre diet will help with metabolism too.
I'd love to talk around gluten. I feel that gluten is talked around a lot on social media, online, on TV. And yeah, like gluten intolerance in particular. Could we kind of like talk a little bit around like what a gluten intolerance actually is and how that might present in someone?
So I think you're completely right. Gluten is like absolutely demonized online.
Yeah.
Which actually a lot of gluten containing products, so like your high fiber gluten containing products, the research shows that if you're including these, you've got a more diverse set of microbiome. So you definitely don't want to like restrict this unless you need to.
Yeah.
But also, I guess also with gluten comes like a lot of your sugary products, like, biscuits, cakes, your white bread, etc., which are not so healthy for your gut. But I think the most important thing to think about with gluten is, have you had a celiac screen already? So if you're having gut symptoms and you're excluding gluten, I see this in clinic all the time, is that celiac screen won't be accurate if you don't have a really good level of gluten in your diet. And really, for that test to be accurate, blood test, you want to be having gluten at least once, if not twice a day, in a good amount. And so then we can distinguish between, is this celiac disease, is this gluten intolerance, or actually more commonly with different gut conditions, it's a sensitivity to some of the sugars in wheat versus the gluten. But a lot of products that have gluten and the fructan sugars, they have a bit of crossover. So the most important thing is to keep in the gluten until you've been tested. Then you can do a gluten trial and remove gluten yourself for, say, 4 weeks and see if it helps your symptoms. If it does, really importantly, you want to retest and see, do those symptoms come back or not? So that's what I'd be looking at. And some people might be sensitive to different types of wheat as well. So yeah, I think the most important thing is have that celiac screen before you're tested, because if you do have celiac disease, it's a lot more to think about than just an intolerance. You have to be very, very, very strict with the removal of gluten, and it's an autoimmune condition. So you can have quite a serious reaction if you're including gluten.
And I guess gluten's in quite a few products that we would kind of day-to-day eat. What are some of the products that gluten is very high in?
So gluten is in all of your wheat, rye, barley products. So it includes all of your different types of bread. It including rye bread and spelt bread too. It includes pasta, biscuits, cakes, some of your grains. So for example, bulgur wheat is very high in gluten. A few other grains are high in gluten as well. So it does cover quite a big section of our carbohydrates. And I think, again, one of the reasons it's probably demonized is because a lot of those carbohydrates may be deemed as less healthy if it's like biscuits, cakes. But we should really be keeping in the higher fibre, healthy gluten products if they suit our gut.
And should we just be cutting out things like cakes, unhealthy foods, biscuits, just as a standard anyway?
Well, yeah, I think this is where diet culture comes in, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because I think there's a real fine line, and it's, as much as I can talk about gut health and we want to feed our gut, we also, we eat socially, we want to eat for our mental health as well. If it's someone's birthday, I don't know about you, but I don't want to miss out on the cake.
No, definitely not.
Yeah. So I think it's about finding that balance. And I always say to clients, as long as you're like 80% eating well, that 20% of the time you can be a bit more flexible. So as long as you're getting in your day, like good meals, good healthy products, like also eat for enjoyment as well.
And around eating for enjoyment, I guess that kind of leads us on quite nicely to drinking as well. So I do feel like there are a lot more low alcohol or no alcohol beers, wines, Prosecco, spirits kind of out there at the moment. Would you recommend kind of having no alcohol, some alcohol? Like what's the right mix there?
It's a really good question. It depends on your goals, I guess. Because if we look at now, like what the research is showing us is that no alcohol is good for us. So there used to be a bit of a theory that a bit of red wine is okay because it's got polyphenols and it's good for our gut. We really know that 0 is good for us now. But, again, it's going back to that rigidity. And do we want to be just eating like for our health, or do we also want to be, enjoying some wine or some champagne at Christmas? So I think as long as you're drinking in moderation is absolutely fine. The other thing to think about is gut symptoms, because if you're someone who's very sensitive, you might be sensitive to different types of alcohol, or you might just want to be more careful in terms of having non-alcoholic drinks in between, or having, making sure you're not drinking on an empty stomach. So I'm all for all of my clients having a little bit to drink, especially around the holiday seasons. So I think it's just about the balance of if there's certain alcohols you're more sensitive to, working out which they are, and just making sure that you're also having, healthy products still feeding your gut, and you're just not overdoing it, really.
And are there alcohols that are better for you than others? Like you kind of just touched on there, that a bit of red wine is totally fine for you. Like I always kind of hear when I'm on a night out or something, people will be like, well, I'm not drinking beer because that's worse for me than, say, the wine is. So I just kind of wanted to clarify on that.
Yeah, so it depends on the individual. Say if, for example, you've got celiac disease, don't want to be having beer because it's got gluten in it. If you're someone who struggles with like a lot of intense bloating, you might be more sensitive to, say, like the gaseous alcohols as well. But again, I would say there's not really a better or worse alcohol unless we're looking at sensitivities. So things like wines as well, they can be very high in histamines, which some people are sensitive to. Red wine does have some polyphenols in it, but I don't recommend it anymore. I think there's some older studies that looked at like the med diet, and they look at the diet as a whole, which, we do eat a whole diet. We don't just eat specific nutrients. But within that, we know people on the med style diet live longer. There's so many benefits to it, and sometimes that includes red wine, but actually if we isolate that from the studies, we don't really see the benefits. So I would say the benefits of drinking alcohol are just having a nice time with your friends and family, which is a benefit. So for that reason we can drink, and you just want to make sure you're not going crazy with it and choosing the types that suit your body better.
So you touched on Christmas there, which is obviously coming up very, very shortly.
Very shortly.
Very shortly indeed. So Christmas can be a little bit of a minefield for those without food intolerances, especially for those with food intolerances. Do you have any practical tips for people around the Christmas period, around, making sure that we are getting eating what's good for us, not maybe overindulging too much, but also being able to relax a little bit?
Yeah. I think that's it, because, we know with sensitivities as well, is those sensitivities can be heightened if you're feeling a bit stressed, and also based on activity, and often we slow down activity in the winter. So you want to be that kind of, the family that goes for the Christmas morning run, really, or a Boxing Day walk. So that can be helpful. I think it's all about the balance. So often what I see in clinic is a lot of my clients, their guts might slow down a bit because they're having a few heavier foods, maybe not as many fibres as they're used to, maybe a bit less exercise. So it's about making small tweaks to allow you to still enjoy things. I've got clients at the moment who are like just kind of coming away from a low FODMAP diet, and so they're starting to test foods, but they're not quite sure what their sensitivities are. And that can be hard around Christmas as well. So you kind of need to pick just in that situation maybe a couple foods that you're being a bit more flexible with. But generally speaking, I guess we want to be keeping up exercise, just being a bit mindful of things like portions, and just not going too crazy, but having like a bit of, relaxing a little bit around it.
It sounds like actually sometimes stressing around, oh, I can't have this, I must restrict this, actually leads to having some of those issues that you're trying to avoid.
Absolutely. It's huge. And I think also, when people are really worried that they're going to react to a food, that is called the nocebo effect. That can actually itself cause a reaction. And there's some really interesting studies on this where people will give kind of like a placebo or a food, and people will react to the placebo because they think they're going to, because they think it has gluten in it, for example, or something that they think they're sensitive to. So this is something that I find really interesting in clinic as well when I'm looking at like helping people detect their sensitivities. So I think having a relaxed approach as much as you can. Also, just chatting to friends and family, because it could be that, you've been following a slightly different diet and you are feeling better and you don't want symptoms to suddenly get worse over Christmas. And maybe, family don't really understand that yet. So I think, planning ahead, talking to friends and family as well can be really, really helpful. Maybe you're someone who is actually really reduced alcohol and is feeling a lot better, but you're going back to your family hometown where everyone's drinking a lot. So I think it's about, planning ahead, telling people, but also just trying to have a relax about it as well.
I guess potentially with that as well, bringing your own non-alcohol bottle of wine or bringing your own kind of like side dish and making it part of that kind of like family tradition, and adding on to that what you would usually do as well.
Exactly that, like making new traditions.
Yeah.
So I think that's a really nice option as well. Just bringing your own. And then it makes others, because there's a lot to do around Christmas. So if you're bringing your own dishes, then it means that the main preparer, maybe that's mum, is maybe feeling a bit less stressed as well.
Yeah.
So I think that's a great addition.
Yeah, and I mean, fingers crossed the weather is gorgeous and snowy and what we always want in the UK. But going on a family walk could be a really nice thing. Yeah. Like my parents have a dog at home as well, so
amazing.
We always love going on a dog walk as well, which is always really nice.
Yeah, absolutely.
We do see a lot online, the carnivore diet, the vegan diet, vegetarian diet, pescatarian diet. I'm sure I've missed so many different types of diet off of that list. Could you just talk to us a little bit about what's best for your gut?
You've just mentioned my pet hate. It's the carnivore diet. So you see this so much online, and I think it's such a controversial one, and for good reason, because with the carnivore diet, lots of people follow this and their gut might feel better if there's someone who's having like loads of bloating or changes in bowels. And really what you're doing with that diet is you're masking what's happening in your gut, because all that meat is absorbed higher up in your gut versus like fibres and plants which go into your lower gut. So you might be feeling better, but your body is not healthier. So the carnivore diet, we know that's going to be very high in saturated fats. It's high in red meat. It's like absolutely not a healthy diet. There's lots of different diets out there. I think things like the vegan diet are really interesting as well. So in terms of a vegan diet, if it's a well-done vegan diet, it can be very healthy. Lots of studies on this. And if it's a well-done vegan diet, we have so many plants in there, as long as your gut can tolerate it, because some people find too much fibre, again, especially if you increase too quickly, it can just cause some gut symptoms. But a well-done vegan diet, as long as you're also being careful with supplements, can be very good for the gut. I would say particular things to watch out for are B12, iodine, omega-3s. I always recommend supplementing as well for vegan diet. So there's a few things that are harder to get, but it's very good in terms of gut health. What else did you mention? Pescatarian diet.
Pescatarian.
Great diet. I love this one. Maybe because I'm also pescatarian. I think what's great with that diet is you have oily fish, which are a really good source of omega-3. So we know that's great for your gut health. But again, it's the way that you do these diets, because you could do a pescatarian diet and you could be having, fish fingers and chips every day. It's not a good diet. So I think what we do know is there's elements of some of these that are really good for your gut. So definitely the fibres, the plants, the omega-3s, the extra virgin olive oil, and that's kind of what we're looking towards for a general gut healthy diet. But you want to add in like the elements of what you enjoy as well. So, you know, a bit of meat is not bad. What I would say is we do know there's really good evidence that we should be minimizing your processed red meat as much as possible. It's not good for your gut. And I recommend for my clients to keep red meat low, usually, depending on the client. And it's just because, you know, too much protein in the diet, too much red meat, not necessarily good. And partly because that red meat is quite high in saturated fat. So you want to go for the leaner versions where you are having it. You can get some really nice, good quality red meats. And in terms of, I guess, proteins and gut health, we know there's some that are much better for your gut. So things like beans and pulses, if you can tolerate them. Great prebiotic foods, high in fibre, also got protein in them. Oily fish we've touched on a little bit as well. So things like your mackerel, all of your darker fish, your salmon, your trout, etc. So that's what I would usually recommend in terms of like a broad spectrum gut health diet.
And I guess like a lot of people, when they're kind of working out, trying to build muscle, actually do go to a very high protein diet. And, you know, I've heard frequently people kind of say like, well, I can't have a pescatarian diet, I can't have a vegetarian diet or a vegan because I'm trying to get that level of protein in. Is that necessarily true?
I would say it's not true. I would say, you know, if you're having like a very meat heavy diet, it's easy to get that protein in because meat is super high protein. Fish is also very high protein. Like a portion of fish is going to give you maybe 25 grams. A vegan diet is harder, but you've got some really rich protein sources like tofu, tempeh, going to be 20 grams per portion. You can get bits from like your beans and pulses, eggs as well. So I think it depends what you're aiming for, because if you're really looking to bodybuild and compete, for example, maybe you want to go super high protein, but that's not good for your gut.
Yeah.
And we know it is about the protein fiber ratio. So the recommendations, this is big on media at the moment, actually. I think it's a really important topic because lots of people talk about protein, lots of people talk about fiber, and often people sit in like one camp or the other. And I think, you know, the general guidelines for protein in the UK are not enough to optimize our health. Like you do want to be having more like 1.2 to 1.6 grams per kilogram body weight. Over 1.6, I probably wouldn't be looking at if you're thinking of optimizing your gut health as well. So I think you want to get that nice balance, but 1.4 to 1.6 is great for muscle growth as well. So I think it's what you're focusing on. So if you are really focusing on like being a bodybuilder, competing, then super high protein, yes. If you are focusing on building muscle in the gym, but you also want to look after your gut health, then I would actually say a pescatarian diet or a vegetarian diet can very easily reach those targets for you.
And we're seeing a lot of kind of vegan meat alternatives in the supermarket these days. Are these actually good for you? And are they like a good replacement for, say, eating a bowl of lentils?
It's a good one. So these products, they are a bit more processed, and I don't want to like delve superly into kind of like processed, ultra processed foods. So I think again, this has been on social media so much, and I think sometimes people can really worry about the processing of their foods. And I think there's a really big difference between like ultra processed foods and then there being no nutritional value versus some processed foods that have nutritional value. And I think in the meat replacement category, those foods are quite processed. I would rather natural where possible, but they do have those macronutrients in. So it depends on the person. I always recommend for vegetarians, if you can get a more natural protein source in, that's preferable. Some people with GI symptoms are a bit more sensitive, with gut symptoms, are also a bit more sensitive to some of those processed products. So they're okay to use, but I wouldn't overuse them in the diet.
And so whatever diet you kind of choose to be on, how many times should we be eating a day? And what should those meals kind of look like as well?
So this, I think, again, varies on the person. If you're looking, for example, at gut symptoms, I've got some clients who will eat 6 times a day, some clients who will eat 3 times a day. I personally think it's a good idea for most people to have some fibre in the morning. Because a lot of people, they'll intermittent fast, and this is a really interesting topic, and it's got some really interesting research, and we know fasting can be quite good for the gut for some people. Some people it doesn't suit as well. But what most people do when they intermittent fast is they'll shift their breakfast. So they'll start eating later and they will finish eating later because that's what is best socially usually, because we all eat dinner together and it might be later on, it might be after work, etc. But if we're thinking about what our body's natural circadian rhythms are, then actually what you want to do is you want to start eating earlier and finish eating earlier. But that's not really what is in line with like a fun social life. So intermittent fasting can be useful, but I think it only works for some people. For most people, this is maybe going to sound like a bit dull, but it's a good point. Like 3 meals a day is really, really useful. And about the balance of those meals. So you want to be going for like protein and fibre in every meal. Yep. And so I think what some people tend to skip is like protein at breakfast. That can be easy to skip because you might have like some porridge and some berries. It's quite low protein. You might want to add a bit of protein to that. So for example, maybe you'll add some kefir or some milk or some high protein kefir. And then if you're having like a lunch or a dinner, you want to be having, again, your protein portion. You want to be having ideally like a high fibre grain or pulse. So maybe something like buckwheat or quinoa or some chickpeas. And then you want to be having like your veggies, or you want to be having like your salady items or some more fibre there too. So, but then again, also, it depends what you're eating now, because if someone's eating kind of very low fibre foods, you want to build the fibre up slowly, because anyone who goes kind of like 0 to hero and like suddenly builds in loads of fibre, you're going to get some gas and some bloating because your body's just not used to it. But generally speaking, what we all want to work towards is a nice high fibre diet. And actually, what we see in the UK is most people get maybe like 2/3 of what's recommended. And actually what's recommended is about 30 grams a day. And what the research shows us is that if you can get higher than that, like a lot of research on like the med style diet, for example, they use 50 grams of fibre per day, which is a lot. And so we do see improvements in gut health if you can tolerate that level of fibre with higher fibre levels. So I actually guide a lot of my clients to kind of like build in fibre to their tolerance level. If they can go really high, amazing.
And so say we're having like those 3 meals a day rather than kind of like 6 slightly smaller portions throughout the day. How long should we leave it before, going to bed after eating dinner? And also in the morning, how long before we should start eating breakfast as well?
Yeah, good question. Another good question. So I always recommend, if you're someone who is struggling with like reflux or heartburn or upper GI symptoms, you want to leave it a bit longer. But for most people, like minimum 2 hours, ideally more like 3 or 4. And the reason is that like your food is still kind of digesting. It sits in your stomach for maybe up to 3 to 4 hours. So you kind of want your food to be mainly emptied from your stomach before you're lying down for bed, because otherwise you're going to get a lot of pressure build up and potentially, reflux. So, and also in terms of sleep, because we know if you eat later, it disturbs your sleep. If you're having a big heavy meal later on, again, it disturbs your sleep because it's kind of going against your circadian rhythms or your body's like natural rhythms. So rough ballpoint, 2 to 4 hours.
And maybe it's an old wives' tale, I don't know. But does it matter if you sleep on your left or your right side if you have eaten before going to bed?
So that is not an old wives' tale. Because your stomach sits slightly to the side, then actually if you lie on your left-hand side, you're less likely to get reflux overnight, because there's further up for the food to go, versus if you're lying on your back, if you're lying on your right-hand side, you're more likely to get reflux. So lying on your left-hand side, a bit better if you're reflux prone or if you've had like a late meal.
Just to kind of like end our session today, Lucy, I'd love to ask a couple of kind of like quick fire questions, short answers only. So, gut health myth that you would love to eradicate?
Oh, so many. So I think one thing that I would say is a calm gut is not necessarily a healthy gut. And this is really just going back to our point about the carnivore diet / restrictive diets, because you might be on a restrictive diet such as carnivore, FODMAP, low histamine, and feel really good. But actually, it's because you've pulled so much out. So long term, we want much more fibre in our diet.
Your go-to gut-friendly breakfast?
Ooh, I would say maybe a little bit against what some of social media says. I would go oats with like some nice seeds, nuts sprinkled on top, maybe some berries in there, and I would also have like a little side of kefir.
And finally, the number one food that people should stop demonising online?
gluten.
Yeah, I thought you might say that.
I guess it's more a part of a food than a food.
Yeah.
But I'll use it.
Cool. Well, thank you, Lucy. It's been so lovely having you on the podcast today. I feel like I've learned so much around nutrition and gut health as well. Yeah.
Oh, thanks for having me.
If you enjoyed today's episode, please follow and share Patient in the Room wherever you get your podcasts. We'll be back soon with more conversations.